Hello and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. So once again, thank you so much for joining us at this webinar, which is about co-creating methods for downscaling the donut. So my name is Andrew Penning. I am the Data Analysis and Research Lead at Doughnut Economics Action Lab. And I am just honored to welcome you all here today to this webinar, which is being held at a time that's hopefully more friendly to our friends in Asia and Oceania. But I know for many of you in Europe and Africa, it's the morning, so hopefully you can tune in as well. So I'm currently living in Europe, but I was born in Canada, in a city called Halifax. So I'd like to begin today by acknowledging that my city is in Mi'kmaq territory, which is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And I'd like to acknowledge them as the past, present, and future caretakers of the land of my birth. And actually, I wanted to invite everyone here today to consider where you are and where your families maybe have roots, to recognize that it has very likely been the site of human activity since time immemorial. And we can consider how our ancestors have had relations with other peoples and how we too will one day be ancestors. So for me, let's make what we do in the present worthwhile so that we can leave a good legacy and inheritance for those to come. For me, that's what Doughnut Economics is, well, it means a lot to me personally. So I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm speaking in English, which is my mother tongue, and to thank those of you who do not speak in English for the extra effort if, this is not your first language. And I'd like to finally acknowledge that our bodies are sitting at different times of the day, and to thank you all for joining in the morning, in the afternoon, and in the evening. And I hope you're having a good day in spite of the ongoing pandemic, which is impacting everyone, but in disproportionate ways, depending on where you are, both geographically and socially. So let me share our plan. And to do that, I'd like to quickly share my screen. But now, as always, in classic Zoom style, I have lost you. Here you are. So let me share my screen. You should be able to see this. So first of all, we are delighted to have Zinat Niazi and Mohak Gupta from Development Alternatives in India, and Willow Berzin from the Coalition of Everyone, which is a core part of the Regen Melbourne network. So Zinat is Vice President of Development Alternatives and leads policy studies and development action initiatives. And Mohak is an urban development professional who's focused on strategies for resource efficiency and participatory planning. And they're going to be speaking about how they're engaging as part of a co-creative process that we've been holding over the past several months, how they've been engaging with those ideas and actions. And Willow is founder of the Coalition of Everyone and brings people together to design pathways for regenerative futures that celebrate our differences and our diversity. And she will be speaking about her experience within the Regen Melbourne network and talking about the activities that have been going on there. So very exciting. Thank you. Welcome to all of our friends who will be sharing what to me is actually the most important, well, just so inspiring to see these initiatives in practice. So I'm also joined here today by my colleagues from Doughnut Economics Action Lab, which is Kate Rayworth, our co-founder and conceptual lead, Leonora Gercheva, who is our new Cities and Regions co-lead, and Rob Shorter, who is our communities and art lead. So our team is rapidly growing, but we still have a majority of us, I think, here today. So we're still aiming to be a small team. This webinar aims to do three things. So first, Kate and I will share progress and learnings with the DEAL community on activities over the past year or so that we have been doing on adapting the portrait methodology for downscaling the donut to places. Second, as I just mentioned, and most importantly, almost, or at least as importantly, we'll hear from our special guests who, not even guests, they're friends, they're a part of our extended community who have been using and adapting these tools and methods to their context in India and Australia. And third, we'll invite you all who have joined today to share thoughts and contributions about this portrait methodology in a short breakout session, and also as part of an ongoing consultation period that we will launch with you all here today. So that's the plan, at least. Some quick housekeeping is for those of us on Zoom. If you'd like to ask any questions or engage, please use the chat box to share your comments, suggestions, questions, etc. And please keep your microphone on mute throughout the webinar. The main session is being recorded, and we plan to make the recording available on our platform. That being said, the breakout session that I just mentioned, that will not be recorded. So just so that's clear. We are also live streaming on YouTube. So hello, internet, to those of you joining on that with that option. So that's enough for me. Now I am very happy to invite Kate to share some welcoming remarks and to get us started. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Andrew. And it's a real pleasure to be here with so many people joining from all around the world. So as Andrew said, the aim today is to share the co-creative process we've been going through on updating the methodology for creating city portraits and portraits of place with the Doughnut. I'm going to share my screen to make a lot of sense of that. So let's just pull out. It's Thursday or Wednesday, depending on, well, it's the beginning or end of Thursday for most people in the world in July 2021. But let's just pull out and recognize that the whole of the 21st century has begun with multiple crises, from financial meltdown, climate breakdown, COVID lockdown. These are deeply interconnected and show us how interconnected we are with each other and with the rest of the living world. And we believe that these crises emerge from the very systems that we've created, systems based upon the presumption of endless expansion, which doesn't work because it ends up undermining itself. So we need to move towards a new vision of what progress and prosperity looks like for humanity. And that's where the idea of the Doughnut comes in. One way of considering a compass for human prosperity in the 21st century. The goal here, leave nobody falling short on the essentials of life in the hole in the middle, but don't overshoot that outer ring, those life-supporting systems of planet Earth. So we need to meet the needs of all people within the means of the living planet. And instead of aiming to endlessly expand and grow, we aim to thrive in balance. If that's the goal, however, we know we're very far from that. This global picture shows us the extent to which millions, indeed billions of people still fall short on their most essential needs in life. And humanity has collectively overshot multiple planetary boundaries. So we are in shortfall and overshoot. We are far outside of this space. And the challenge of this generation, of our generation, is to turn this story around for the first time. We have to remember that last century's economic theories and government policies, business models, and community actions and aspirations were never aimed to solve this, because they never saw this. So we'd be crazy to think that old theories and policies and business models and actions would get us there. We need to come up with new insights for our own time. That can either be utterly overwhelming or outrageously exciting, because we get to redesign and reinvent and remake. So this is the goal of the Doughnut. And this was first published in 2012. And ever since then, one of the main things that people have asked is, can we downscale this concept from the global to here? Can we do it here? The first one was created in Kokstad in KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. An organization there took it and imagined Kokstad in 2035, and they used the Doughnut to imagine the future. And the very first thing they did, if you look at the bottom left-hand corner, they added a wedge for fun to the social foundation. And that was a wonderful signal. Oh, people are going to play with this. People are going to make it their own. They're going to make it make sense in their own place. I remember seeing this photograph from the Wuppertal Institute in Berlin, people having a diagram of the Doughnut and saying, well, what would it mean to create a city Doughnut here? And I remember staring at that and thinking, well, how would you do that? How would you take this global concept and make it local? And a fantastic study from Lake Erhai in China, researcher quantifying to the extent possible the social and ecological status of life in that water basin. And then the work of Oxfam in Wales. So many, many people in these and other places have been aiming to downscale the Doughnut. For me, the moment of clarity came when I heard the biomimicry thinker Janine Benyus talking about humanity belonging within and learning from nature. And she took the Doughnut and essentially flipped it inside out in a way that really confused and then enlightened me. And between us, we put our ideas together and came up with what we think is a really clear and powerful framework that works for downscaling the donut anyway. And that's what we want to share today. And that's what we're working on and improving the methodology on. So we start with the idea that can we live within the donut wherever we are? And I invite everybody listening to think of your neighborhood or village, town, district, city, nation, region, whatever scale you want to think of this at. Can we live in the donut here? Well, we want to unroll it. Let's open it up and draw it out into a space, because there we've got a place to imagine and play between that social foundation and the ecological ceiling. And we can envision the future that we want here, wherever you are, in relation to the world, recognizing that always everything is interconnected. So here's the question. How can here, where we are, wherever you are, become a home to thriving people in a thriving place, while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? And that breaks out into 4 questions, one for each of these 4 lenses that we can zoom into one by one. So we start with asking, how can all the people of this place thrive? And how can this place be as generous as the wild land next door? These are the local aspirations of a place, and I'm going to dive in more in a moment. These are the local aspirations, and many places, many cities or communities are assessed and rated globally on this basis alone. Oh, it's a great place to live, got great Wi-Fi, good communities and schools, and there's forests and clean water nearby. That's great, but every place must recognize that it has a global responsibility for living well in relation to the rest of the planet and all people. So we must also ask, how can this place respect the health of the whole planet and the well-being of all people? Let me dive into each of these 4 lenses and show you what it means to explore them, and then try to create this methodology for actually bringing some specificity to it where you are. So how can all the people of our city thrive? I'm going to think of it through the lens of a city. What would it mean to thrive here, wherever you are? It's going to be different in Bangalore or in Berlin, in Stockholm or in Dar es Salaam. What has COVID-19 made visible that was already there, but now can no longer be ignored, from racial inequalities to whose work is essential but massively underpaid? And what could turn out to be the greatest strength of your community and culture, enabling you to pivot? These are entry point questions, but what we really want to ask here is, could we actually bring metrics and specificity to each of these dimensions of life in this place? And let me give you the example from the city of Amsterdam, which is one of the first cities that we worked with to bring this specificity. So I'm going to take the example of mobility. So we asked, does the city have a target? Does the city have a goal on what good mobility looks like for thriving here? Yes, the city did have a target. The city is accessible to everyone via public transport in a safe and accessible way. That's the city's existing target. Okay. Does the city have any data that we could use to assess whether or not it's meeting that? Well, we looked, and the best available data that gives us some kind of snapshot is that in 2017, residents made 665,000 journeys by bike every day. And in 2018, they gave the city's public transport a rating of 7.7 out of 10. Now, that doesn't tell you everything you want to know, but this is the best available data. And so this already tells us, is this target exactly what we want? Maybe it's a moment to upgrade the target. What really would it mean to have thriving here in terms of mobility? And what data do we actually want to collect? Could we supplement this with other data from communities, from different neighborhoods? How could we really know that we were thriving in terms of mobility? Let me move to social equity. The city has a target on that. Citizens enjoy greater independence and seldom experience inequality of opportunity. And I must say that the word citizens in Amsterdam, when you ask people, they say, oh, we mean residents. So I prefer to say residents, but this is the correct language from their city target. Now, the snapshot, 16% of residents in lower income neighborhoods say they lack control over their lives in some aspect. And that's higher than the national average of 11%. So that's telling us something. Again, you can already get a feel that the data that are available only give us some sense of a snapshot of what's going on. And I think a big part of the 21st Century Project is to bring more and better data that's sensed by people, photographic evidence, official evidence, community gathered evidence, community science, so that we can really better understand how are we thriving here and what is our goal. So those are some examples from Amsterdam on the local social lens. What if we could actually put targets for every one of those dimensions against them? Does the city have a target? Should the city have a target, and what should it be? How do you create that? And then what would be the best available data wherever you are to create this snapshot? Let me move to the local ecological. How can our city be as generous as the wildland next door? So the idea here is to go to what we're calling the wildland. That means the most healthy natural habitat of this ecosystem where you are located on planet Earth. What is nature doing here? Because nature is cleansing the air and housing biodiversity, storing carbon, cycling water. Nature is generous. And how could your city aim to match or exceed that generosity? How could the city store carbon, harvest energy, manage and build soil? This is from Janine Benyus's work, and it's wildly ambitious and yet literally, utterly natural. So again, let's come to Amsterdam. I'm going to just talk about the example of regulating the temperature. Well, Amsterdam is built in a place that would be forested. There's some wonderful natural lands nearby you can go to, and the forests cool the temperatures. That's how nature does it, from the treetops to the forest floor. How can the city aim to match or exceed that? Can a city, through parks and through trees in the streets? The city does indeed have a relevant target to increase the use of green spaces, green infrastructure. That target could be tightened up to talk about cooling. Because if we look at the data, there is data. Amsterdam's temperatures can be up to 5 degrees warmer than surrounding areas due to the urban heat island effect. And actually, we know that lower income neighborhoods have fewer trees, and that means they suffer more from this heat island effect. That undermines kids' ability to learn in school. Everything is connected. So there's one example from the local social for Amsterdam. Again, what if we could put targets against all of these? Most cities don't have these targets because they're not thinking this way yet. And then what if we could bring data, whether it's official data or citizen science or sensed and experienced, stories that show us how people are living and how affected by the ecological performance of their place. Now let's move to the global lenses. How can our city respect the health of the whole planet? These are the 9 planetary boundaries, and we know that every place, through all the global supply chains it's connected to, through the food and clothing, electronics and consumer goods and construction materials imported into your place and exporting out that waste, it has an impact far beyond the boundaries of the city on the whole planet. So how can cities decarbonize their energy and mobility? How can they create circular material use and massively reduce that through flow? How can they, for example, transform their food systems as an example of one of the many systems you can transform to reduce your pressure on the planet? Amsterdam has a target on climate change, as many cities now do, to reduce the city's in boundary, so the local carbon emissions, to 55% below 1990 levels by 2030 and to 95% below 2050. Now, I'm going to say I think that's just too slow for any high income city or nation, and I'm going to call out my country, the UK, here too. But it's a target, so let's hold the city to account against its target. Well, in 2017, Amsterdam's in boundary CO2 emissions were 31% above 1990 levels. So they've got to get by 2030, 55% below. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of decarbonisation. But the real kicker here is to recognise that nearly 2/3 of the city's total CO2 impact worldwide are produced beyond the city boundaries. It's not the cars and the heating in the city, it's all the consumer goods that are imported and the emissions that are produced far overseas where those imports are made, and all the transport emissions. So this means cities need to step up their ambition and take care not just of in-city emissions, but their consumption emissions. And cities like Amsterdam are beginning to do this. Now, I'm holding Amsterdam up here because they're actually one of the few cities that have stepped up and put these stats forward. They're facing it. This is true in every high-income city, but some cities are actually facing up to it and then can start acting on it. In another area, what about land conversion, the impact of converting land worldwide? Well, Amsterdam, like most cities, doesn't have a target on this yet. And so this is a good example. Let's create targets. Let's raise our ambition to take action on all these planetary boundaries. A snapshot, we just know that the amount of land required worldwide for Dutch consumption in 2013 was 2.5 times the area of the Netherlands. That really is a snapshot. We're talking not about Amsterdam, we're talking about the Netherlands. This data is old. This is the extent that we need to update and improve our ability to take account of places' impacts worldwide. And then let me come to ask, can we create targets across all of these planetary boundaries? And can we bring metrics that measure them? This, to me, is at the heart of the 21st century project of bringing the relevant metrics, especially into high-income places that we know have long been overshooting their pressure on the planet. Lastly, how can our city respect the well-being of all people? Which companies are headquartered in the city, and what are their business models and how are they impacting worldwide? Which multinational brands and retailers are selling in the city? And what's the labor behind the label? This is harder to pin down specifically, but there's a lot of global supply chain research that actually connects brand names that are on sale in many cities to labor rights around the world. Let me give you two examples from Amsterdam's. So cities don't have targets around about other people, but they have all signed up through their nations to the SDGs. So let's hold them account for the SDGs. Target on health. SDG 3 says ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages. Well, people in Amsterdam and cities worldwide are using mobile phones. And if we look at global supply chain research, it shows us that actually the people producing the minerals and the metals for mobile phones are not at all respected in terms of their health. This example, a woman, cobalt miner from the Democratic Republic of Congo, she says, we have problems with our lungs and pain all over our bodies. I have to say, this is not that same woman. I'm using another photograph to illustrate this quote. But this shows we can trace life in our cities, in our places, and my use of my smartphone is connected to the rights of people worldwide. We can show these connections. Again, workers' rights, promote full and productive employment and decent work for all. Amsterdam, like cities worldwide, imports chocolate. In fact, the Port of Amsterdam is a massive importer of cocoa into the Netherlands and Europe. Well, they're connected to Ghana, and in Ghana, more than 3,500 workers on cocoa plantations are engaged under conditions of forced labor, and there's child labor. These stats are in Amsterdam's city portrait. And when we first created it, there was a resistance, there was a shock. This doesn't feel like our city. But we said, but this is your city. Your city is connected to people worldwide, as every city is. And then to their credit, they embraced it and published it and started talking about it. And that means they're actually now in action to doing something about it. This is true in every city worldwide. So let's pull out. These become a canvas. And then we can start to say, let's put issues that matter, like transforming mobility wherever you are. We can put it in the center of the canvas and ask, what targets does our city already have that are connected to transforming mobility here? What's the current snapshot, the data we can gather that connect to the impact of mobility here? What are the really key challenges that we know we face? What are some new initiatives we could put in place? And how is everything interconnected? And that's the potential power of using this framework. We practiced this and we trialed this in 3 pilot cities, Philadelphia, Portland, and Amsterdam, in late 2019. And what was very clear that the policymakers and the community members involved really valued this opportunity to see their city through these targets and these snapshots of data and get a holistic picture of the whole city and its interconnections. And Amsterdam really ran ahead with it and published that full city portrait. And we think there are many ways it can be used. It can be used, as I've just described, as a mirror on the current state of the city. And then you can use it to set a mission. Okay, these are our current targets. Where do we actually want to go? Who do we want to become? How do we mobilize change makers across the city to bring about these needed changes? And how can we map onto this all the good things that are already in action? Let's celebrate the action that's already happening. How do we use this to change the mindset of policymakers, of business, and of residents about what it means to be a thriving place? How do we build momentum? So come back year on year. This September, Amsterdam is holding itself to account. Where are we now on our portrait? How do we use it to monitor progress and update those statistics? And then it has to be irresistible. It has to be fun. It has to be engaging to do. So the power of peer-to-peer inspiration is incredible. Amsterdam published its city portrait in April 2020, in the height of its corona crisis. We then quickly published the first iteration of the city portrait methodology that we're discussing here today, so that anybody could pick this up and use it worldwide. And we were amazed within a few months, cities and places and nations worldwide were engaging with it and using it. Brussels created a beautiful graphic version of these 4 lenses. Melbourne, who we're going to hear from today, took it and involving 600 people imagine what would it mean to be regenerative Melbourne with the donut at the heart. Curaçao created the island snapshot of the donut. And then a neighborhood, this is the smallest scale that we know of, a neighborhood called Ladywood in Birmingham, are using it to reimagine the neighborhood from street to street upwards. This is the work of Civic Square, whose work is also on our platform. I'm going to stop there and hand over to Andrew to talk about how we've now taken this first version, drawing on everything we're learning from the amazing initiatives going on, to take it to the next level.
Thank you so much, Kate. That was wonderful as always, to hear the story of how we got to here. And what I'd like to do is take us a little bit behind the scenes on what we've been up to over the past year. So let me share my screen. Okay, so here is the city portrait methodology, and we flagged right within it that, well, really the focus of it, as Kate just mentioned, was to make publicly accessible, make it as widely available as possible, the methods that were used in Amsterdam, in Portland, and Philadelphia to create the portraits. And in the process, we also wanted to identify and just other approaches that, due to time, due to resources, due to the reality of applying a methodology, we didn't take, but we could flag and identify that was another option. So to provide a guide so that others could do it. And we asked that in return, people, if they do pick it up, then please adapt it, innovate with it, inspire others to do the same, and share back your innovations so that we can, in future iterations, build on those learnings, which is very much the spirit of this second version that we're talking about. So just to highlight some of the directions that we already saw, one was to develop an approach in collaboration with Global South cities and places to adapt what was applied in all Global North cities, which have their own particular context, as Kate mentioned, on high resource use, responsibility to act first and fastest in terms of bringing their levels of resource down, and different pieces. So we recognize that context is not the same as the context where the majority of humanity lives. And so how can we adapt those methodologies? And we're going to speak about a co-creative process that we built around that. We also identified that in those Global North cities, we took just very rough snapshots based on available data, but to what extent can we deepen that analysis and start looking at things like history and power, and of course, colonial legacies and the benefits that places in the Global North have accrued disproportionately relative to other parts of the world because of those histories. And also, as Kate just mentioned, was to adapt these methodologies. We really worked at the city scale because of we had a partnership with C40 cities, and that's where the energy was coming from. And we have a principle of going where the energy is. But we are confident with this methodology that it can be scaled at many different levels. So we want to explore what that could look like. And I just wanted to flag that we already wrote this in the methodology because we were already receiving interest from organizations and places that were wanting to adapt the methodology in this way. So we were essentially just flagging the energy we were already seeing. And over the last year, we've been trying to act on it. Now, when we speak about the Global South process, we of course recognize that, I'm in Europe, as I mentioned, Kate is also in Europe, so that we need to, if we want to speak about adapting these methodologies to a Global South context, we're not in that context. And so we recognized and we invited a team, an amazing and inspiring team of contributors who could join us in adapting these methodologies and thinking about it. And Zinat and Mohak were core members of this. And the whole vision was, of course, to adapt it to the context, the priorities and needs of the Global South. And recognizing that we are receiving this interest, so with the team, we wanted to bring together people who understand the core concepts, who have the skills and experience to contribute, and who are willing to embrace this open and collaborative approach that we have rolled out. And we've identified, we're amazed to have joined us from Bangladesh, from Brazil, from places in the Caribbean, both Curacao and Barbados, Costa Rica, in India, in Malaysia, North Macedonia, in Zambia, and across multiple country offices of the United Nations Development Program. So that was great. In terms of process, we built the team at the beginning of this year. We invited the contributors. We were amazed and just so humbled by the response. We held a series of workshops, and the plan was to have 5 online workshops to explore each of those lenses that Kate just presented in detail, and think about how can we adapt this to the context in a global south in places. Yeah, and also recognizing, of course, when I say global south, there's a huge diversity across the context of the contributors who attended, and we recognize that as well very early on. Then the plan is to pull together a zero draft methodology and to present that to the deal community in a public webinar for consultation and contributions. You could say that that's where we are at today. So that's wonderful to be at this stage. And following that, our plan was to publish a Global South Portrait Methodology version 1 that incorporates all of the comments of the co-creator process, as well as this from the deal community, sometime in the fall. That was the plan. I just have to recognize that for myself, this has been a huge learning process, and it's been a wonderful privilege and an honor to be a part of it. But of course, things don't always go exactly to plan. One of them, for example, is we ended up recognizing that there wasn't enough time to hear from the many different initiatives that were already underway from our co-creative team. So we enlarged the scope to a 6th online collaborative workshop. But the biggest change by far was that very early on in this co-creative process, we recognized that the issues that were being raised to a large degree applied in virtually all contexts, though of course in varying degrees. And what we realized is that it wasn't necessarily helpful to be publishing a global south focused methodological guide. What we were really talking about is looking to publish the next version of the overall guide, taking into account different contexts. So that's the direction where we've gone now, and that's where we are planning to publish in the fall following this consultation period. If we want to see a little bit of the action of what we were doing, here's the team at work. It was all completely done over Zoom using online collaborative tools, Google Docs, Google Slides, breakout sessions. It was amazing to see the inspiring content and concise contributions from everyone. Here's what we did. We had the sessions focusing on each of the lenses, which Kate has just described. So the local social lens, the local ecological, the global, and we also considered interconnections as well. And finally, that 6th session, as I mentioned, where we just took a step back and listened to all the things going on in those places that I mentioned. So I just wanted to flag a couple of things that helped us make that decision I just mentioned to not have a global north and a global south focus. And one of them was just recognizing some breakout groups, the types of things that were coming up when we asked, what are the questions arising? And one was around scale, others around power, and others around recognizing the diversity of places. And if we dive into each of those a little bit, as Kate just mentioned, there's a neighborhood in Ladywood at one scale. That's the smallest scale that we've seen, but of course there's also towns and cities, there's regions, there's nations, and there's questions, of course, on how do we apply this methodology? What are the criteria for choosing an effective scale for localizing the donut? And there's no right answer to that question. What we can do is think about, well, what are the governance structures? What's the jurisdiction? Does it make sense here? What are the interconnections with other places? Should we take them into account explicitly or try to think about, just recognizing them less explicitly? Are we in a bioregion? What other things? So these are the types of questions we were presenting in the co-creative process, and also that we are hoping to bring out in the breakout sessions in a little bit. We also, when it comes to power, we have this framework where it's thinking about the design traits of the institutions who are embedded within a place and asking, what can they change? What do they have the power to change? Can we look at their purpose, their networks, their governance, their ownership structures, and their finance, and think about how they can be aligned to move towards the goal of living a thriving people in a thriving place while respecting the health of all people on the planet? or are we in a place where it's holding us back from achieving that goal? And we've actually we're developing a tool and a canvas to explore these questions of powers to act in more detail that we're also planning to release in the fall. And finally, diversity. Kate mentioned this already. We're aiming with the portrait methodology to be as locally relevant as possible, recognizing that there are many different entry points to create transformative action. And so rather than being comparable across places, each portrait is going to look and feel a little bit differently. And the way that we tried to bring this out was in the very first session, we asked the members of the co-creative team, what would be an alternative to the donut from the culture and context that you're in? And these were the responses that we received. And I invite you all to, if you see any, or if any come to mind for you now here today of a donut shaped food from your culture and context, please feel free to throw it in the chat. So if we were thinking about, actually, I'm just going to jump straight into this slide, which dives into one example from the global ecological lens, thinking about the types of questions, how we can adapt this to the global south context. So Kate just presented, as we've heard, how can this place respect the health of the whole planet? And here are the core dimensions that we asked in global north cities, and we believe that it's very important to take into account. But when you think about a global south context, you can also start asking of, in some cases, especially in low consuming places, maybe the question isn't so much about how we can respect the health of the whole planet, but it's actually about how can the degradation of planetary health, which is already being locked in, and occurring elsewhere, how is that impacting this place? And should we recognize that and bring it into the methodology? And if so, what are the major impacts that we could draw out, and how could we measure them? And would there be different dimensions? So we could think about coral reef bleaching, or ocean dead zones, or sea level rise, or heat waves and disease spreads, and who knows what else. So that's a question that's very alive for us in terms of the methodology, is how can we take into account those two-way relations? So far I've all been speaking about the Global South co-creative process, which has been a huge learning and inspiring process for me and for us as a team. We also recognize with this change that there's a bunch of global north cities in the global north and places which are already in action, already in motion. So in order to try to bring together the learnings from people who are already underway, we held a series of learning conversations where I sat down with people in Amsterdam, in Barcelona, in Brussels, in Melbourne, in Cambridge, in Copenhagen, Cornwall. Most of them are ABC places so far. So we need to fix that imbalance, I think, for the next places. And of course, also in Toronto. And it was really, really interesting and inspiring and wonderful to hear how these places have taken the methodological guidance that we have provided and adapted it to their own context. And that as well, we want to bring into the next version of this guidance. So that's essentially what I wanted to say for now, but because the next part is hearing from some of those places, I just wanted to flag is that this is a screenshot of the documentation that we will be announcing after we hear from the other speakers. And you can see it's very much a draft for consultation. It will be available online, and we're looking forward to hearing your contributions. I'll leave it there for now and invite members of our co-creative team to please share the things that you have prepared with us. So if I could invite Zinat and Mohak to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Kate, for the introduction, and also for refreshing back to what we've been doing for the past maybe 2.5 months, I think, 2 months. Yeah, it's been quite some time. What I thought we would do between Mohak and I is that we'll just sort of introduce, and then Mohak will take over on really how we are now planning the rolling out of our work, or rather integrating this as we move forward. But before that, just to put a record that, Development Alternatives, we have been a great fan of the work of the Doughnut Economics Action Lab, and the whole concept of Doughnut Economics, which sort of absolutely, I'd say it responds, reverberates in that sense with the thinking that inspires us from Gandhi. Looking at it very much from a local global connect perspective, and a lot of our work in the last 30 years has been in that direction, and so it's very natural for us to start relating to this, so last year, actually, it was in sometime in late August of last year when we established a reconnect. I had with Kate through an ex-colleague of mine, and we said, okay, this is a process that we really must work with, because we are also working to build up our urban resilience and urban transformation program. And so we move from solution delivery to almost a mechanism where we are working with larger communities to develop or co-develop directions for urban planning or urban services. And so that is that really sort of came together in the right time. Mohak, if I can ask you to move. So the work that we did with Kate and Andrew and the rest of your team was really exciting. Just so that we bring into context where we are coming from, the 3 maps that you see below are from WRI's work, and they are really what we are grappling with in India, an urbanization trend which is telling us that we have huge transformation happening. It's not, we are still, we were always known as an agrarian country till some time back. The rate of our urbanization is much faster than most in the world now. We are overtaking the material consumption, if I may say so, and energy consumption, that I might say so. We will probably be equivalent to China in a couple of years of the quantum that we are demanding and needing. And but the interesting factor is that our urbanization is a very different kind of urbanization. It's large numbers of small. There are a few large, so you see the blue blobs that have grown as we move from 1991 to 2031, as has been predicted. But we see the intermediate, the 2011, we are really in 2021 following this trajectory. So it's not a very wrong projection. The tier 2, tier 3 cities are growing in number. That's where the most dynamic action is. Rural areas are transforming, and there is pressure, there's problems with governance, there's problems with capacity. And so, yeah, we are going into a mess, but there is a huge energy in the urban system wanting to change. And there's a lot happening on the ground, and that's where really we want to be. So Mohak, next. And this is adapting from what we've been going through these last few years. And what Andrew just mentioned, how do we see this frame in our context? I had actually used this frame as a discussion with a student group last month to test it out with them on a group exercise. And very interestingly, when we said we are looking at these 2 issues of locally thriving but being responsible, we are saying we would like to be prosperous, but we also would like to show global responsibility and leadership going forward. The top right-hand box we could handle. The bottom right-hand box is something which was a difficult thing in social responsibility. And I think we need to probably bring that out from ourselves, because we are no longer the persecuted southern country in that sense. I mean, there's a lot that we do, that interconnections that Kate, you spoke about. This is, there is a lot that we are doing, and the way we are growing, which has a huge social impact, cultural impact on regions outside of our human settlements. So just thought I would sort of bring this out there. But so let's go next. So I'm going to hand over to Mohak a bit to highlight these co-creative issues and things. And then, Mohak, over to you. What have
Okay.
we?
Thank
Yeah.
you, Neena. Yeah, thank you for setting the foundation for what we've been doing. In terms of what we've been working on for the past few months, during the co-creative process, first thing we realize is that when you look at regions across the global south, we realize that there are many similarities in just the fundamental nature of challenges. Despite all the diversity that we've been talking about, often some issues remain fundamentally similar. And another things that we were just talking about right now in terms of scale, we realized that in our regions, there is a need for connecting systems across hierarchies, because we have national, subnational governments which hold the decision-making powers as well as the financial devolution, whereas we need action from the local governments who currently have low capacities. And when we talk about hyper-local bodies in terms of neighborhood organizations or RWAs, they have no agency yet. So these are hierarchical issues we need to address. In terms of the deal methodology itself, we realize that the fact that the principles from deal are so scale and sector agnostic, it gives us a lot of room to innovate and be creative about how we apply the tools and methodologies, while we still raise questions on both the local and global system impacts. So one of the things, like Zina just mentioned already, was like, how can Indian cities, specifically we're talking about the smaller tier 2 and tier 3 cities, but how can we make them respond to global social challenges? So there are issues like this. But what the list of indicators does, the indicators that the team has developed, it allows you to pinpoint sectors. The ones highlighted in yellows are ones that we believe are our target areas we are already working on, and we would like to build further using this methodology, plus also some indirectly impacted sectors of work. But you're constantly forced to wonder what are the impacts at the local and global level, and which box they fall into. So I think that's just a reflection from the methodology that I find is very relevant. Based on our work so far, and based on what we do at Development Alternatives, there are some key themes that we are taking forward. One of the biggest issues, of course, that has come up time and again is the focus on localization now. And when we talk about localization, we need to realize that there is need for economic growth to be localized. So we need policies that invest in creating a locally oriented economy and leads to community wealth building. So that needs to be a big focus from the local government levels as well. And the same applies to decision making. The issue of power comes up again and again in developing country contexts. And so we realize that there are always going to be some local power dynamics. So how do we navigate them, and how do we analyze issues that are actually based on the criticality of the issue, but also how actionable they are in the given scenario, and what the political will is that is going to push it through. Then we also want to make sure that the solution delivery itself can be localized. So we want to create platforms where decision makers can be matched with solution providers. So in a sense, you are encouraging local innovation and enterprise to take place. One of the issues we already know going into the process is that there are going to be problems with availability and access to data. So in our countries, we imagine that there are going to be questions about how sufficient the data is that is available, but also of what is available, what is the quality and reliability of it. Then again, linking back to the power issues, like who owns and controls the data, whether the data we are referring to, it's developed by the government, or does it have private interests at play? So all of those things, issues of data reliability again come up. And then whatever data we have, how is that communicated and delivered to stakeholders? So we need to work on all of these aspects of the data bank as well. Then keeping the deal methodology at the heart of it, if we want to drive urban transformation, we realize that it's going to be very important to strengthen the forward and backward linkages. I'll explain this in the next slide. So going forward, we tried to actually figure out that if we want to do the city portrait methodology as an exercise, what is the value chain that we're looking at that will actually enable the methodology to deliver results? So, and there are backward linkages as well as forward ones. So starting from the left, the backward linkages to be able to reach a position where stakeholders see value in doing this methodology, we need to first of all develop partnerships. In our case, we are developing partnerships with cities and investing heavily with academic institutions as well as residents. So through these partnerships, we hope to engage them and use it as an opportunity for capacity building. So through trainings and workshops for and with policymakers and students. So that we are now in a position where we can actually start applying the methodology and going through the drill. And for that, one thing that we realize in the middle of this process is, of course, setting up those data collection mechanisms. So one of the ideas going in, and I think this has come up on the chat as well, that we need to leverage the power of new data collection mechanisms to actually ensure that the data that we have is usable. And for that, going in, we can probably come up with a city dashboard that allows for concepts like citizen science and crowdsourcing of data to really take root. And through this, because we are also working with academic institutions, so we see an especially strong role for youth, so for students from schools and colleges who can help in this process in collecting data and designing these systems as well. And of course, then you also need these data mechanisms to be able to monitor and track progress. So having these backward linkages in place then allows us to go ahead with the portrait methodology, and which is basically essentially it's a mapping and visiting exercise for where the city is and where it wants to go in terms of all 4 lenses. So we use the exercise to identify a city's pain points, and then we also take it forward to actually reach a point where we're able to deliver solutions for these issues as well. So the first step towards that, the one we hear on top is we need to work with policy design in terms of creating the ecosystem that allows for these solutions to happen. We work with communities and local stakeholders for collaborative solution designs, and we create platforms for connecting for matching and connecting the policymakers with the solution providers. And finally, to the solution delivery, in what we are focusing on is breaking down urban services into chunks that can be provided by local enterprises. So responsible delivery of urban products and services for community wealth building. So the idea behind this, the process is to really activate the value chain so that we have a successful visioning exercise, and it also leads to results. So moving forward, how we are approaching this is, there are 2 kinds of platforms we'd like to present, focusing on 2 different approaches. One is the action research part of it, and then the collaborative solution design. So one of the platforms that we have developed recently and we are going to be using for our action research is a Center of Excellence for Resilient Human Settlements in the Western Himalayas. So one thing to point out here is that, of course, the scope for this center is more geographical. So we're looking at the mountain systems in the Himalayas, but also to say that we deliberately chose the word resilient human settlements instead of urban or rural, because these are areas where we realize that urban and rural linkages are going to become an important frame of analysis. So in that respect, we want to we think that the deal methodology can very easily be applied to cover those linkages as well. So under this platform, the opportunity for us is to actually set up these systems for research and training, especially for this geography, and then engage diverse voices for the visioning exercise. The second platform is 11, which is our urban transformation platform. And here the focus is more about encouraging enterprise and connecting them to city governments and designing solutions. So this does not have a geographical, but a more sectoral focus of systems and technologies that we are working with currently. And we hope to sort of expand this further. But what this does for us is essentially this approach actually becomes a reiterative kind of a model where the action research is driving impact because we are designing solutions for the same. And that helps us build further engagement to conduct more research. So this is the kind of model we are working with. To give you an example, like I mentioned, in the Himalayan region, the focus is going to be regional as well as cities. So we're going to be looking at sectors specifically like the construction sector, because we realize it has a huge impact in terms of the building materials we use, the technologies that we use. So that's one high impact sector. We understand that it's an ecologically fragile region, so we're going to be working with a view on disaster resilience, both at a macro and micro level. Then thirdly, of course, economic opportunities, livelihoods is an integral part of any work we do. So this is an issue that at the local level that needs to be addressed as well. Because these are heavy tourism dominated economies, there is a potential to link the redevelopment of even villages and small towns with ecotourism initiatives. Water, sanitation, health issues remain a big big problem in these areas still. So that's something we need to work on, along with the open spaces, density, and shared resources, especially in the urban areas in the mountains. So the idea is that different initiatives will have different kinds of focus areas. These are some of the target sectors we are hoping to work on under our mountains initiative. In terms of the way forward, this is what we've discussed so far. To sort of summarize, what we're working on is really the partnerships and capacity building now. So working with all different kinds of stakeholders to work on systems thinking and really putting the deal methodology into practice, and engaging these stakeholders through training programs, immersion exercises with universities and short courses, in order to sort of be able to co-create knowledge and disseminate it in a useful fashion. Our focus is primarily resource circularity issues, sustainable consumption and production, then really working on decarbonization and circular economy. And we're trying to be very mindful of the local and global responsibility that we hold. And at the local level, we want to foster an ecosystem which allows for local green and social entrepreneurship. And then at a larger scale, be able to leverage the industrial symbiosis to actually create closed loop and regenerative processes. And that's what we're looking at. That's our presentation. So we're open to questions. Zeenat, if you have something to add, if you'd like me to go back.
Thank you, Mohak. So this is really, in a sense, I'd say the first few that we have shared, platforms on which we have been sharing these ideas. It's the Center of Excellence is a new initiative in association with the Dehradun Institute of Technology University in the western Himalayan state of Uttarakhand, and has a support now from the Department of Science and Technology, not financial at the moment. It's really the last. It's really where Kate mentioned, we go where the energies are, and as we worked in this region, we found partners and organizations that are very keen to look at issues of localization and human settlements. And so, in a sense, we are like a magnet trying to draw people together and start working on that. The formalization of the process takes time, but I think that doesn't stop our action from being initiated. We hope at some point we would come back to this forum and maybe more to say, okay, 6 months down the line, this is where things have moved. This is how we've tested the methodology. This is how we've got data in. This is how we are moving forward. So yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. That was really, really inspiring and wonderful to see. I'm all I can say is great, thank you. We are looking forward to continuing this relationship and to having you back in 6 months as you consider it a date. That's wonderful. So if we have a couple moments for questions. I noticed there was one question about the partnerships, which you answered in the chat, Zeenat, but did you want to elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I think one question that keeps, and it's a very valid question: in what capacity are we building these partnerships? We are not a government organization. We are not researchers of the traditional academic kind. We are not corporates with loads of money to come in and start. We are a civil society organization and a think tank, and so it's in our DNA to look at transformational processes for taking our societies to a better place, or helping walk with our societies to a better place. And I think that's what drives us. And so we call ourselves catalysts in that sense. We call ourselves innovators, if you may say so. And so we bring people together to catalyze innovative action. And so yeah, in that sense, we have no position, but yet, that's how I suppose things happen. We are entrepreneurial in our approach, but we are civil society in the way we work. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. And that sounds like, well, as we know, has a lot of overlap with how we see ourselves at Doughnut Economics Action Lab, of just simultaneously not having a structured role, which allows the freedom to, of course, move in where the energy goes. So thank you so much. I think in the interest of time, I will close this piece, and unless there are any final comments, then
there seems to be one other question, but maybe Zinat and Mohak can pick that up in the chat as well.
Sure. Did you have that question handy, Leonora?
Pratisha asked, what was the hook for the cities to come on board? How did you approach them, or they approach you? Is this
maybe I can do a very quick thing. The process that we are following, and we, like any other organization dependent on project funds, we use our project funds to engage. And so as of now, what we have been doing is working on what we've called resource assessment work for certain resources, building materials, water, systems, and we work with the cities in that process as researchers to give them back the knowledge, and that is the way we engage with them to bring them on board. We had a whole series of seminars last year that brought some of the cities that we are now working, wanting to engage deeper with, along with some entrepreneurial startup solutions for the kind of pain points that they had identified. And those webinars and workshops were our mechanism to understand the challenges, what the city is facing, also what solution providers face. And so these are like building blocks and connecting points that we then use as hooks to come together.
Great, thank you. Well, wonderful. This has been incredibly inspiring. I'm looking forward to everything. Can I please ask Willow if you're ready to share about Regen Melbourne and Coalition for Everyone?
Sure. Excuse me. Thank you. I will just get my screen sharing on. Can you see that okay? Yeah. So firstly, just wow, it's so inspiring to be in this network with amazing people doing amazing things. And thank you, Zinat and Mark and Kate and Andrew and the Deal team for having me tonight, and with everybody here to share this time in your mornings or days or evenings. I think it's a very mixed time zone. So look, my name's Willow Berzin. I'm calling in from Melbourne. It's actually about a year ago to the day, I think, that Kate did a talk at the Small Giants Academy, and a bunch of us all were so inspired that we thought, oh, can we do this here too? And I was one of those people hopping up and down like a mad person going, this is amazing, this is so inspiring, let's do this. So that's kind of our time frame from that sort of initial inspiration catalyzing moment to where we are today. A bit about some context behind that is, so my background is actually Jewish European, it's Scandinavian and British, but I was born in Australia, and having spent most of my adult life living in London and Europe, I feel quite connected to some of the places that many of you are probably calling in from as well. Since returning to my hometown of Melbourne, I'm much more aware of the growing desire to reconcile our history here on this land that was never ceded. And our story here is unique when we think about the 60,000 plus years history that our Indigenous custodians of the land and the air and sea have held. And I would like to acknowledge that I'm calling in from the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and that some of us here may also be calling in from other Aboriginal lands, and to acknowledge elders past, present and emerging. So look, wearing two hats actually. One is as a convener of Regen Melbourne, which I'll come back to in just a minute, but the other role I play is with the Coalition of Everyone, which is a little bit the idea, as it says, it is what it says on the tin, but it exists to repair and build democracy, and we do this using participatory and deliberative practices, spreading collaborative decision-making tools far and wide. And our vision is a future where collective wisdom is celebrated in service of a healthy and an equitable planet. So we are very much aligned. And as one of the conveners of Regen Melbourne, I'm absolutely delighted to share some more of the story of how we have been playing with the Doughnut Economics framework so far. Regen Melbourne is so far a network of over 60 organisations and over 1,000 individuals embracing using the Doughnut as a compass towards a regenerative future for our city. And I will show you some slides. Whoopsie-days, that's a terrible cursor use. I'm not used to that one, excuse me. First slide. So this is a little bit of the methodology that is the background to our first project that started officially, publicly in the beginning of the year, but before that we sort of formed a network in October of last year. So Melbourne's unique context is we have now, I think, had over half a year in lockdown. So we have a quite strong lockdown rules that we've all been through, and there's some kind of collective, perhaps you use trauma, it might be too strong a word, that the people of Melbourne have been through a lot together through this to try and come through the time of the pandemic in different ways to other places. So we have a unique context that we've been through that has this has run alongside that. So our community activation started at the end of last year, and then we held this engagement phase where we held participatory community workshops that were very inspired and influenced by the Doughnut Economics Action Lab's framework methodology tools for the city portrait. We held 5 workshops. They had about 60 people each over the course of weekly for February, and each one was a different part of the Doughnut. At the same time as this, there was a series of leadership interviews with some prominent Melbourne people, quite a diverse group of people that was also understanding what they were thinking about being in lockdown in this time. And then from those workshops, we collected hundreds of sort of data points of what people's visions for a healthy Melbourne, a connected Melbourne, an enabled Melbourne, an empowered Melbourne, and an ecologically healthy Melbourne might be. And there was a synthesis process that was sort of the distillation of all of these hundreds of different points that was put together by a wonderful team of different service designers and facilitators, a really diverse group of people that had stepped into a facilitator network to help support the work. And the insights were collected and put together in a report, but we also then fed this back into a series of roundtables with other prominent sort of groups and networks to build and ensure that we were actually speaking in a way that resonated with other people in Melbourne and connected to all of the other work that had come before as well. So to ensure that we weren't just trying to reinvent the wheel, but actually listening to what already exists. And that came together in a report, which is public on the website. Everyone's welcome to read it. There's a short one and a long one, and I'll put the link in later. And we launched this at the end of April after Kate did an amazing keynote at our Melbourne Knowledge Week. So that was our first project. From this, let's try my cursor again. Here we go. We co-created a vision statement for Melbourne. And I think at this point, there was possibly up to 600 people in the network that we were reaching to and speaking with and listening with. And there's 6 sort of parts of the vision statements. There's that a regenerative Melbourne is knowledgeable, full of life, affordable, connected through culture, collaborative and enabled is the point that we got to for how we see our city moving into a thriving and safe and just space. The 6th one, the enabled one, that our economic and governance systems enable these other visions to come to life, is the one that I geek out on and think that the role of democracy is so important to help people be empowered to have to take agency to act. And from that, we did our own contextualized version of the Doughnut. We slightly adapted it. The inner rings in the left side, we opened out networks to become about art and culture. Melbourne prides itself on its art and culture scene, which has been decimated through the pandemic and the lockdowns. Mobility and access to information. We also added, I suppose, through the context of Melbourne going through the hard lockdowns, we all realised the importance of community and relationships, and that without them, we are much poorer for it. And so we added these to the inner rings and our reconnection to nature. I think everybody realised the the time that we had when we could go was so much, we just wanted to be in green spaces or blue spaces, anything with nature. It was a calling to be connected to nature with. And then this orange part that is this binding ring, I think is the bit that we realize that the inner and the outer rings actually need to be together and connected, because it all is interconnected anyway. But this process of healing and reconnecting to country and each other is also part of the reconciliation process. And then we have half a dozen guiding principles that came from this process as well. I'll try and read through them quite quickly. So we recognize and honor the connections to First Peoples to country and value their contribution to caring for and managing the land and waterways of Melbourne. We commit to building reciprocal relationships that build a safe and just future for all. We believe in the balance between wisdom and action, between pursuing research to increase our knowledge and undertaking projects to generate change on the ground. We value lived experience as an important expertise and center this in our process. And we value both community-led approaches and sector-based expertise. We will move at the pace of trust in our ongoing community engagement, and we aim to create less hierarchy and more dialogue, creating circles and donuts, not silos. This is kind of the principles that we take through in our work. I hope you can read this. I won't read into the details of this. It's all available on our website if you wanted to find out more. But from this process, we came up with a roadmap for the next couple of years of how we see the way forward to bring us into the safe space. It's about 12 parts. It's the beginning of a co-creative vision and roadmap. And so since this was released at the end of April, I suppose we've been in a different phase, which is now starting to work out how do we do this part next? How do we actually activate the roadmap, and how do we engage our communities, and how do we ensure we're listening to the most marginalized and unheard voices and bring everybody along with on this transitioning process? I will send the link if anybody wanted to look into more details of this. But basically the 12 parts are starting to take shape into 4 main groups. There will be a research element and a group of organizations coming together to help the research parts. There'll be storytelling, projects, and of course, convening. And so what happens next for us is basically the opportunity is to bring people together, organizations and individuals, to find their role, I suppose, in the roadmap. And Kai Lofgren, who's one of the masterminds behind the strategy of all of this, who couldn't be here tonight, but he basically has been doing some very heavy lifting in the background to help establish Regen Melbourne to become an anchor collaborative, which is a really interesting term I'd not heard of before. He raised that to us, suggesting that Regen Melbourne can act as a way for all of this work to come through, for people to collaborate on, and so that we can take action on our common goals towards this destination that we're heading towards. So with that all in mind, the opportunity really is basically how can Regen Melbourne bridge system silos and create a network of networks to move our city into the donut. And next, it's about building the capacity to deliver the 2021 to 2023 roadmap and towards how we can get us into the safe space described by the donut by 2030. So we've got a really ambitious vision. We've got a really ambitious sense of it, but there is movement and it's really exciting and people are responding to it really well. So what happens next is we'll start to share this more publicly, this bigger strategy of how we get involved next for the next stage of the project. That's it from me. Thank you. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Willow. It's amazing to have seen the thought and the care that's gone into thinking about that vision for regenerative Melbourne and identifying the principles, and it's all very, very well structured. I haven't received, I'm not sure if any of my colleagues have seen any direct questions for you. Looks like
I'll jump in with a question. Hi, Willow. That was fantastic to
Hi,
hear. And
Kate.
I just want to ask a question, which I know is already a live question in your conversations and we've had with Kai, which I know that the work has begun by focusing on the local aspirations of a regenerative Melbourne. What does it mean to be thriving people in a thriving place? And I know the next step is going to bring in how do we situate that in our global responsibilities as a wealthy city in the global north. And I saw actually in the chat box earlier, someone said, oh, when I was talking about how do we think about our connection with the clothing and the food and electronics and materials that are coming from all over the world and going out, someone posted there's a nice exercise you can say, you know, the world in my teacup, where did my teacup come from? Where did the tea in my cup come from? Who did the work? And what I love about the work you've done in Melbourne is it's so engaged and engaging and participatory. And I wonder if actually anybody on this call and indeed yourselves have ideas of, okay, how will you bring that same level of engagement and really helping people think about how we in Melbourne are deeply interconnected with the whole planet and with people worldwide. It's just lovely to hear any ideas you have. And I invite anybody on the call to put in the chat box possibilities of how to help people who show up in a room and say, what's this about? To think about these deep interconnections with the whole world.
Yeah, that's a good one. So yeah, we started the portrait methodology process, and it's by no means complete. We've touched the edges of it, and that's part of the next part of the roadmap, is to do a deeper version of that. And I think it was when you did your keynote in April, seeing the diagram that you couldn't fit on the screen of Australia's overshoot, you had to scale it down because it was so big, was just horrifying. It's like, oh, we are so privileged. We are so, I don't want to throw out all of the negative words right now. It's really shook me up a lot, I think, and others as well. And I suppose having that awareness, I think it's the role of communication and storytelling. I'm not a natural storyteller. I'm a recovering marketing and advertising creative, if anything. But I think what is people respond to is being able to put themselves in a story, and it's the telling of stories that are hopeful and show change, even if it's the smallest ones. Like I love that little, is it Birmingham, where there's like at a neighborhood level, they're just so wonderful. It's like the more stories we can tell and the more stories we can share and inspire and have an accessible and inclusive process where people feel like their voices are heard and count and you can do something. It's, I think a lot of Australia, while we have 80% of the population are worried about climate change, but if you ask anybody, nobody knows what to do. So there's this kind of gap between concern and obviously there's different audiences, concern and then ability to take action. And I hope that as this movement builds, it becomes more accessible to others to be able to step into roles too.
Exactly true. And one of the aims that we've done in creating this 4-lensed portrait that says, let's look at here and our connection with the world, is precisely to help all of us figure out what are really compelling ways to make this accessible and just becoming obvious to each and every one of us. So again, I invite everybody on this call to think about how would you in your place help residents who show up to really think about how our daily lives are interconnected with the whole planet and with people worldwide. Because if we can crack that, we can design amazing workshops that just make it fascinating and very eye-opening to people, and then massively extends our sense of moral concern of what we have responsibility for and connection to, and action, right? The possibility of action, to take action in our own lives that affects the whole world. So thanks a lot, Willow. I'm just really looking forward to seeing the next phase of this amazing work you guys are doing.
Thank you. Likewise.
Me too. One of the comments that you mentioned, Willow, about stories, is I very much sympathize with that. I find I'm not a very natural storyteller. I think of myself almost as I like data analysis, I like numbers, I like kind of writing code and sitting with my keyboard, but I love stories. So just, it really is just such an important element, and that's wonderful, wonderful. So we have some time still for, there's two other pieces of our of this webinar that we have planned. One is to hear from all of you in terms of some thoughts, and in breakout sessions in smaller groups, a couple of questions about the methodology. If you have any questions that we could address in the handbook, as well as any specific experience that you could bring. But I also wanted to ask if there are any final comments related to the Melbourne conversation that I am missing in the chat box, or anything before we move on. Great. I think, well, other than to thank you once again, Willow, for sharing, I think we can move on to the next spot. Thank you very much. And let me quickly share my screen to give us a little bit, to ground us in this idea of a breakout session. So you should be able to see that. Once again, this is the previous methodological guide. And the idea, as we've now mentioned several times, is that we're adapting it. We're moving to a second version. We are opening up a consultation period to show as far as we've gotten with respect to that second version. And it's kind of a new and exciting, and also the first time that we've opened up quite so early in a process. But the idea is that there's just so much energy and there's so much urgency in terms of sharing this methodology. So we want to get it out as early as possible so that we can hear from others. And so this is the screenshot I showed previously. It's a Google Doc right now, which we have enabled that people will be able to provide comments. And what's different about it? Essentially, for those of you who are very familiar with the methodological guide, what we've tried to do, the previous one, the first version, is we tried to build on what was done in Amsterdam, Portland, and Philadelphia, and start flagging those new learnings from both the Global South Co-Creative Session, as well as learnings and actions that were already underway. One of the ways that we're trying to do this, that we believe could be helpful, is by identifying a couple just key boxes. So previously we had a box for useful resources, where if practitioners were looking to apply a specific lens, so it's the local social lens, for example, what kind of data sources could be useful if I wanted to do this in my place? And we flagged those. And what we recognize is it might be helpful, we're keen to hear suggestions, is to have a couple other boxes. One of them in terms of key issues and things to keep in mind, and these are related to questions that keep coming up over the past year that we've been identifying, or just issues to flag. And another is around kind of inspiring approaches, trying to showcase the adaptations and the innovations within each particular lens that we've been seeing and that we've already heard in India and in Australia here today. So that's the idea. And for the breakout sessions, what we are hoping to do is, in that overall context, we're going to ask you to move. There will be a slide that looks similar to this. Well, Rob will explain all the logistics in a moment, but the key questions are that, considering, like, do you have any specific questions about the methodology that we could address in the handbook? And within the overall Google Slides that you'll be sent in a moment, you can see, even if you're not super familiar with the methodological guide, at the bottom of the slide deck is the 4 core questions, and just so that you can have those as prompts for your discussion, if that's helpful. And the second question is, again, based on your own experience or the experience of your group, do you have specific examples that we could include in the handbook, thinking about indicators, thinking about data sources, or other inspiring approaches and methods that come up? So that's the idea, and I will pass to Rob to explain any other little bits.
Thanks, Andrew. Just a few practical things on breakout rooms. I'm sure many people are familiar with them by now, after lockdown and having to do lots of work online. But what we're going to do is we're going to break out into groups of about 4 people, and you'll be automatically assigned to a room. The room number will appear at the top of your screen, and in the meeting chat you can now see the link to some slides. So if you go to the slides, you can see the rooms correspond to the slides. So if you go to the appropriate slide. That can be a place to capture the notes from the discussion. So maybe one person or more than one person wants to add notes there. The time will be 15 minutes and there'll be an indicative timer at the top right-hand corner of the screen, and I'll just give a message in the last minute so you will know to finish your conversations before we all come back to the call together for the last part of the meeting. So I hope you will have really good conversations. Here's the link again in the chat to the Google Slides doc, and see you all in 15 minutes.
Hello, welcome back. I hope you had some nice discussions during the breakout session. And if you were mid-sentence, as we were in our group, and just suddenly got zooped back into this main session, then apologies for that. But we're very happy to see you again. So here we are. We have another few moments and one last piece on our overall agenda, which was the plan to show a little bit of what this document is in terms of the consultation and to announce how it's going to be working. So let me share my screen one last time. And actually no, let me change my plan, which is not something you should do right in the middle of a webinar. But I wanted to, why don't I just take us straight to the document, which is, of course, you can see I have far too many tabs open as always. And here we can see is this consultation document that I showed. This is a screenshot that I snagged for the presentation moments ago. It's, as I mentioned, it's hosted on Google Docs. And the purpose of this methodology is, once again, it's a handbook for practice, building on the previous methodological guide. And given that it's in Google Docs, I guess just a few housekeeping / caveat notes. One of them is that it's very much a working document, and I just need to reiterate the working document-ness of it, because it's we certainly recognize that the text, the tone, there's content that we know that we want to add, and different pieces. But what we were focusing on doing here was to, as early as possible, create a structure and some containers almost that we could invite others to share their experience, share their comments, share their suggestions, so that we can then take it into account. And that's essentially the spirit of this document. When we do publish, which will be in the fall, like a more finalized document, we're actually planning on publishing on Google Docs as well. And the reason for that is because the previous version, given that it was like kind of a closed PDF style, it wasn't as easy to update and to work on an ongoing basis based on the energy that we're seeing popping up. So what we want to be able to highlight is, Melbourne is here, India is here, Toronto's doing this, and then all of a sudden now Ottawa is doing something, or Lusaka is doing something. Then we want to be able to incorporate that learning and that knowledge very quickly. So we're planning on publishing online, and this is the approach. I will note that when we ask for comments and contributions, Google Drive, you are actually able to suggest text. Like if you're familiar with track changes, then you can suggest text right in the document. And we're asking, it's in the headers, it's in bold here, we're asking people not to suggest directly inline text, but instead to use comments. And comments in Google Docs are, just to briefly show here, you can highlight any text, you click add comment, and you say, hi. And that's that. And the reason for asking to not provide inline text is because if you're familiar with Google Docs, there's no way to simplify the markup, and it gets quite difficult to read the underlying document if a whole bunch of people are contributing, which is what we want, but we would like please to use the comments. So with those caveats in mind, I just wanted to briefly show on the left-hand side, again, if you're familiar with Google Docs, you can see the overview of the document, which walks you through the principles, which you can see are not even submitted yet, not even added in yet. Here's our donut. And quite importantly, one of the adaptations that we made is to, again, for those who are very familiar with the previous methodological guide, we've been trying to bring in this design concept on unrolling the donut and showing everything very clearly within this space under the ecological ceiling, but above the social foundation. Is really important to us because what we've heard is the donut is so strong visually, and it's simple and it's compelling and it's wonderful. And the portrait in the first version, you started to lose that clear link with the donut. So what we've been working very hard with the designer in Amsterdam as well is to bring that link back into this portrait methodology. So it's very important to us. So we're trying to bring it in here. And other things to note, here we're in the local social lens. For example, you can see, I just wanted to flag these boxes that I mentioned before. So here we have a useful resources box to help if a practitioner wants to find data or indicators or just, those pieces, but also these other keep in mind box are of important issues to recognize and acknowledge if you're undertaking this lens. And inspiring approaches. So bring your examples, bring, again, keeping it focused ideally on the specific lens at hand so that we can identify and flag and show others the amazing things that are going on. So this is the idea. This is what we are opening up now. The notion is to do so for around 6 weeks. So take your time, and we will also be kind of working on this document at the same time. So it really is a kind of collaborative process. I hope that makes sense. I'm kind of been going off script, and we have a few minutes for any questions. And I've just thrown in the chat the link to the document itself. So I will, in the meanwhile, if we're waiting for any questions to come in, I would love to invite Kate, if you have any comments or anything that comes to mind to follow on from that.
Just to say that this has really energized me today. I have to admit, I haven't had my breakfast yet today. I got up very early this morning to add some new details into the slides I was presenting. And I'm sitting here with an empty stomach, but with an extremely full head and heart and feeling very energized by this. It's why Deal exists. It's why we created an organization, so that we could create tools that we put out into the world in the commons, knowing that there are incredible change makers everywhere who will say, that looks useful to what I'm doing. I'm going to pick it up. I'm going to adapt it to my context, and I'm going to run with it. And we just heard 2 brilliant examples of that this morning. So it's very affirming for us with this work, and highly energizing just before we go off on summer holiday as an organization. Deal is going to go quiet for August. That's why we wanted to put this document out so everybody could engage with it now. I just want to say one thing, that the framework that we're presenting now is around cities and places and towns and neighborhoods and communities and countries. It's very much a place-based framework. And I know that some people are also interested in saying, how can we take these concepts and bring them to business, bring them to the world of companies? And that's a huge area of interest. I want to flag it up now because it's also the area where Deal feels the most risk of greenwashing, which I'm sure everybody can understand, right? Some big companies would love to stick a donut on their website, say, yeah, we're doing the donut, and then it gets discredited for everybody. So until now, we've been very tight, actually very, very strict with businesses. We've said there's a tool on our website, if anyone wants to look at it. It's called When Business Meets the Donut. Any company in the world is welcome to use it. It's a tool for internal reflection. So you go inside your company and you sit and you reflect. What you cannot do, and what no company can currently do, is use the donut in its website, in its marketing, in its public presentations. We put that in place, and it's very, very strict, I know. And the reason is to protect it so that we only open it up when we're ready to open it up. I'm delighted to say we have just recruited our first ever business and enterprise lead, who's going to be joining our team in September. It's somebody fantastic who's going to do this so well and open this up with such brilliant care. So if anyone's interested in thinking about how this relates to business, and of course, anyone working in place, it relates to business because their business is in every place, please hold off from using it now. Wait and see what happens when we start opening this work up, because we're going to make some really great tools that invite business in with a high bar. It's going to be challenging for some companies. we invite business in to explain how business is going to transform to be part of the regenerative futures that we're aiming to create. So that's what I wanted to share. And I've just massively enjoyed this webinar, and the one that we held yesterday evening for people more based in the Americas in another time zone. This is, as Andrew said, the launch of a co-creative and consultation process for this document. It's just going to be the second version of the document. It's never going to be finished. It's going to get richer and better and smarter and wiser through all the ongoing experiences. So if you're sitting here thinking, I want to be part of this, we haven't even begun, then what you may begin now will probably influence the third version of this document. So think of it as a rolling, flowing process. So let's get to work. Let's create the second version. Let's bring in everything that we can think of and have learned so far. And let's just make this more valuable and a richer experience for all the work that we all go on to do. It's just lovely to be part of this very big team work. And it's moments like this, I think, yeah, thank you, Zoom. Thank you, world, for enabling us to work with incredible partners around the world in real time. There are gifts of online working, and this is one of them. So thanks so much.
Ditto, ditto. Well, on that note, there's not really much more to say. Besides to thank all of you for joining. Thank you, Zinat. Thank you, Mohak. Thank you, Willow, for sharing your experiences. And very well. Well, thank you. I'm also incredibly inspired. I did manage to have breakfast this morning. So I have a full belly and a full head and a full heart, and just everything is full and inspiring. So thank you all for being a part of it. I bid you adieu.
Bye all. See you.
Bye, guys.
See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.